Right, with me today I've got Marilyn Glenville with me, and Marilyn is the UK's leading nutritionist in women and in women's health. So Marilyn, thank you very much for talking to Fab After 50 today.
Oh, nice to speak to you, Kerry.
Right. Now, we have had lots of confusing messages regarding the menopause, and I think there's lots of confusion as well amongst our readers. So thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Oh, no, you're welcome.
Go through and sort of try to sort of perhaps navigate our way through the mist.
Some interesting questions you've had. One of them is basically how long would the hot flushes last for? And frighteningly, the menopause could last for 5 to 10 years. Doesn't mean to say every woman's going to have them that length of time, but they could go on for that length of time. So the sooner a woman does something about it, much better. But they can carry on if the woman's not taking action to try and reduce them. And that would be the same for the hot flushes and the night sweats. Yeah. And questions connected with that have been about what seems to be a second menopause.
That's an interesting one, isn't it, that one?
Yeah, whether menopause is going on for a very long time, like with some of the questions, up until the age of 62. Now, what we've seen in the clinic, we have had women come in, even around the age of 65, with hot flushes and night sweats. Some of them have still been on HRT, and even one of them where she went to the GP and asked to increase the dose, but still wasn't working. And when you think that woman's basically 15 years past the menopause, it's a long way past it. I think in those situations, or where it seems that the menopause has come back again, what you have to look at that then is the connection with our adrenal glands. So actually stress.
Right.
So when we go through the menopause and our ovaries reduce that production of estrogen, we produce estrogen from two other places. We produce it from our fat cells, and that's why the tendency is to put on a bit of extra weight around the middle. But we also produce a form of estrogen from the adrenal glands. So if somebody's under a lot of stress, or the symptoms have gone and then they go through a bout of stress, it can be that triggers the symptoms off.
Right.
And then, like with this woman who'd had a lot of stress in her life, there was financial problems with her husband as well, so relationship problems. It was actually getting the stress reduction in place and making sure, calming her body down, and then the symptoms went. So in that situation, women will often say to me, well, I've tried all the natural remedies, the sage, the black cohosh, the agnus castus, the phytoestrogens, and they're not working, and they won't work when it's being driven by the adrenal side. And we have to think of things like B vitamins, magnesium, Siberian ginseng. You have to think of it in a different way, and that's a solution rather than it actually being the menopause carrying on for the next 12 to 15 years. For some women, younger women, it may even be a mixture of the two, stress and the menopause hormones mixed in together. And then you'd work on both of them using natural remedies for both the menopause side and the adrenal side. But the adrenal glands play such a big part in our lives. And for some women, they're quite aware that if they're running late for an appointment or they're anxious, up comes a hot flush, and they can feel it being triggered by that anxiety and tension.
Right. You mentioned now, obviously we're talking to people there who've been sort of 10, 15 years. How long should the menopause actually last for? Is there a standard?
There isn't a standard, and most of us won't feel it for that length of time. But when we talk about the perimenopause, we're talking about around the menopause, and the change in the hormones can start anything after the age of 40, whereby that decline and the change starts to happen. And first of all, what may happen is the woman stops ovulating or doesn't ovulate every month, but she'll still have a period even if she's not ovulating. And then there can be some gaps. She'll miss a period, miss 2 or 3, they come back again. Obviously, the patterns can vary from women to women. Some women, the cycle gets shorter, so they're having one every 21 days, or they're bleeding for much longer, or the gaps get longer. It varies tremendously, and there's no right or wrong way for that transition to happen. But it is very much a transition that can take around 5 to 10 years, but most of us don't feel it for that length of time, but that hormone change is going on. And in fact, now what we realise is the slower we go through the menopause and the slower this change, the more comfortable it is to happen. And that's why women who go through a surgical menopause, they're literally going through the menopause overnight because they've had their ovaries removed for whatever reason, but they're going through an overnight menopause, which makes it more traumatic.
Right. I know one question that just came out repeatedly from readers of Fab After 50 was they felt, what could they do about becoming a little bit less hairy? They felt we were getting a bit too hairy, but possibly even turning into men at one point. So,
well, interestingly, as we go through the menopause, we're still producing, we do produce testosterone, even though it's classed as a male hormone. We produce it from our ovaries, and we also produce male hormones from our adrenals as well, called androgens. And what happens is, because the estrogen levels declining, the male hormones, although not necessarily increasing, become more dominant because the estrogen is less.
right.
So putting in things like phytoestrogens, which have a balancing effect on hormones generally, testosterone and estrogen, would be actually very good in terms of getting that in the diet. I know there has been suggestions that women take or use testosterone to increase sex drive, but those women who are getting excess hair and maybe even acne coming back, that's what the feeling is of having too much of these male hormones. So putting in testosterone as a hormone replacement therapy could be quite risky in terms of increasing those hormones of excess hair, skin changes. So we have to be very careful about replacing hormones as to what kind of side effects we might get from them.
Right.
And even it's been mentioned about testosterone in some of the questions, but also natural progesterone.
Right.
So that's classed as a bioidentical hormone. And for some women, we've had the theory come through that we're estrogen dominant. Right. And I understand that because we have a lot of estrogens coming in from the environment. We get them from the plastic industry and the pesticide industry. So there is the feeling that actually, yes, we're living in this sea of hormones, predominantly estrogen. And there's been a lot of work on plastics and bisphenol A. And in the DEFRA, the environmental agency, a couple of years ago, was showing that a third of the male fish in the UK rivers were becoming feminized because obviously HRT, the pill, residues of pesticide end up in the rivers and then can feminize the male fish. So I understand that we could be estrogen dominant, which could increase our risk of things like breast cancer, fibroids, endometriosis. But it doesn't mean that we try and correct that estrogen dominance by putting in another hormone like progesterone. And women have perceived estrogen to be the bad hormone and progesterone to be the good one. Yeah. But in fact, progesterone can increase the risk of breast cancer, just the same as estrogen can. There are some good studies on it. I have put the references in my Natural Solutions to the Menopause book. Progesterone promotes what we call angiogenesis, where blood vessels form to tumours. And this is not talking about progestogen, which is the synthetic version of progesterone, because women all think the progesterone is the natural version because we produce it in our bodies. But it still increases the risk of breast cancer and increased proliferation of breast cancer cells. So whatever hormone we may be introducing at that stage, it's hormone replacement therapy. It's just for some women, they may have decided just to replace progesterone and not estrogen. And the studies have shown that actually progesterone cream does nothing in terms of prevention of osteoporosis. It's no better than a placebo. And this was a study over 3 years. So they have to be wary that progesterone increases the risk of breast cancer, but is not going to help prevent osteoporosis in any way.
Actually,
so it's a good question.
I know I was at the same conference that you were actually speaking at recently, and what I found interesting was when they gave the stats from the HRT studies, it seemed that there wasn't that much difference in terms of the efficacy of the therapy between those taking the placebo and those taking the actual HRT.
Yeah, so the placebo response is high. It is. And I think, yes, if women are given the right tools, I know, we don't really want to use placebos, but in terms of getting the diet right and all of that, and yes, if the placebo effect is high, why risk a medication that could give us breast cancer? Yeah. It doesn't stack up. It's much better to do this in a different way. Yes, and people have asked about things like aches and pains. That's an interesting one because for some women, some of the worst symptoms are not the hot flushes and the night sweat, but actually joint pains.
Right.
So estrogen is thought of almost as an anti-inflammatory, and when it goes down at the menopause, they start to get inflammation in the joints and sometimes feel almost very creaky getting out of bed in the morning until they feel they've geared themselves up, and then it goes off. But we're thinking then we have to keep our joints lubricated. So things like the omega-3 fatty acids, the fish oils. If somebody's a vegetarian, they do it with things like flaxseed oil, but they are really important because they lubricate the body from the inside out, and that includes our skin, hair, vaginal side as well. And to make sure, and they act as anti-inflammatories. So we want to keep the inflammation low in the joints. Vitamin D, also interestingly, which I mentioned about getting it tested, also controls inflammation. And the other one that does, which many people may not know about, are probiotics. They actually have an anti-inflammatory effect. So we are more prone to inflammation as we get older and more prone to things like arthritis and connected with the menopause as well. But nature provides us with foods, and also we can take them in supplement form as well, that actually can control that inflammatory response. So really important, especially if the women are finding that the aches and pains have come on since going through the menopause when they might not have felt them before.
As well as aches and pains, the other thing that was mentioned as well was with overall fatigue.
Yes, and obviously changes in the hormones can do that. And when women come into the clinic and ask about or talk about fatigue, and I have to say, whatever age, it's the most common symptom. And often they talk about TAT, T-A-T-T, tired all the time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think if some woman's feeling like that, she must see a GP anyway and get the thyroid checked and make sure she's not anemic. So general medical ones ruled out, and they're not an issue, but oftentimes there can be nutritional deficiencies, which we do check for in the clinic. And it is thinking about getting the right vitamins and minerals in there, and especially if a woman's been controlling a diet to try and lose weight, there can be deficiencies because they've missed out certain food groups or not been eating enough calories generally. And then the other thing is also making sure about the blood sugar balance, because if that's on a roller coaster, they're going to get highs and lows in energy. It's really important, and more important as we go through this hormonal transition. So fatigue is a big one. And if the women also are getting night sweats, they may be having lack of sleep. So it's actually the night time that's the issue, because it means they're tired when they wake up in the morning. And then what we have to address is actually the sleeping rather than what's going on during the day.
I have to say, my fatigue is due to a snoring husband. I'm not sure how any sort of taking his diet is going to change that, really.
Yeah, it's very, very common.
Husband replacement therapy rather than hormone replacement therapy. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just thinking, are there any other mood swings? We've had quite a few questions on, haven't we?
Yes, and that's the one symptom that may be really strong in this lead up, in this perimenopausal time, much more than hot flushes and the night sweats. And that's where the hormones are really on quite a transition as they're changing, leading up to the periods actually stopping. So we're, strictly speaking, only postmenopausal when we've had 1 year clear of periods. And then we can say we're after the menopause. Up until that time, we're actually perimenopausal, because a period could suddenly appear after 6 months. But the mood swings can be very strong. Herbs like Agnus castus are brilliant for that, because they're almost, women describe it as almost magnified premenstrual symptoms, but they're there all the time. Blood sugar control is important, because if they go into hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, they're going to feel moody, irritable, really low. So it's important to get that corrected. And also thinking back to vitamin D as well. When we think of that as our sunshine vitamin, that can have an effect on our moods. And omega-3, the fish oil, they help work on brain function. So they're really important in terms of low moods and depression, and picking up the moods if they are finding it difficult going through these stages leading up to the menopause.
We've covered an awful lot there. I'm not sure there are any other obvious ones that we've missed. We've had so many sent in, and thank you to everybody that sent the questions in. And hopefully, over the time that we've had, we have been able to answer quite a few. Gosh, we have done a lot, haven't we?
We have. And I think about when we talk about insomnia, which is often a common one, and again, the insomnia can be affecting energy the next day. And when we think of insomnia, it can be happening in two ways. Either the woman doesn't get to sleep easily, so it's taken a while to get to sleep, and or they could have both of these, waking up in the morning, and even waking up with a night sweat. Yeah. So we have to think, is it due to some of the symptoms around the menopause, which we could use natural remedies for, like black cohosh, sage, agnus castus, and especially if it's that waking up at 3 or 4 a.m., that can actually be a blood sugar issue. That actually blood sugar, which is on a roller coaster during the day, can also be on a roller coaster during the night. Right. And it drops down by about 3 or 4 a.m. And it's actually adrenaline that's waking them up. And some of the women talk about having a night sweat, or they feel like they're getting palpitations, or they're just wide awake. So controlling blood sugar during the day, eating little and often. And if they are waking up around 3 or 4 a.m., just for a couple of weeks while they sort out their food during the day, would be have to have a small snack, even just an oat cake or something clean, not something sugary, just before they go to bed. And that should hold up the blood sugar all the way through to the morning and should stop that 3 or 4 a.m. waking. So it's just to find out what's causing the insomnia, because it's not good if it's affecting their energy next day, which then affects their quality of life and how they function, and, you know, can affect moods as well, because they can feel quite low if they're feeling really tired. So it is important to sort that out and get it corrected.
Lovely. Thank you. Well, I think that's probably all we have time for today, but thank you so much for joining us. And what I will do is definitely put the links to your books, because you have several. I know that when we've reviewed them on the site previously, but I look forward to sharing that, including you've got a cookbook as well, haven't you, with recipes that we can follow as well.
That's a really good one. All the desserts are sugar-free, so it's very clean. It's got the phytoestrogens, essential fatty acids, and the antioxidants in there.
Yeah, I know. I've actually made several recipes myself. It's very Mediterranean-based, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So lovely. So thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to sharing these answers with our readers, and talk to you again. Thank you.
Nice to speak to you, Kerry. Bye.
Bye.